Hi everyone, welcome to the show. Today I'm going to be talking about brand architecture. Now, this is a question that I get all the time. And as a marketer, it's really important to have an understanding of what it is, why it's important, how to think through it, because you will be asked one day to be a consultant on that for your organization or for somebody else. And I want you to really know this well. Now, the one thing that I have not seen a lot of is consistent teaching and training on brand architecture. It seems like, yeah, you can kind of look at it on AI and chat and different stuff, but I find that it's really missing that practicality and what it is and how do you structure it. And it's so important because if you get it wrong, it can actually lead to years of higher costs, confusion, loss of brand equity, and a whole bunch of different things that happen. But if you get it right, you're going to create a lot more speed to market. You're going to create simplicity, easier communication, and it's going to make your life as a marketer way easier. And it's going to help you, the ownership group, which is ultimately what brand architecture is for, to help them maximize the value of the organization. And you get to take all the credit as the marketer. So, are you ready to dive in? Brand architecture. All right. So, there are 4 key brand architecture methods. And it goes from the singular brand all the way to a multiple brands in a portfolio. So there's 4 elements. It's called, the first one is a branded house, which is a master brand strategy. Then it moves to sub brands. Then it goes to endorsed brand strategy. And then finally to the house of brands, or what we call a portfolio strategy. And so I'm going to walk through each one of those, and we're going to look at the pros and cons, what's the difference, and how do you actually take advantage of it for your situation. Okay, first one, master brand strategy, which is called a branded house. Now, if you are a small or growing, so if you are in a startup, emerging, or growth phase of your brand, do not entertain anything outside of the master brand strategy. Your energy and effort is all about growing brand equity for your current brand. And this is why it's so important, is that this is what consumers will recognize, what they'll know, what they'll come to trust, what they understand that it means. And you need to stay consistent, and you need to make sure that this brand has such a great brand love with your consumers that it creates value. And so a branded house is basically taking that master brand, and you are now moving it through to different line extensions and then to different categories. So a good example of this would be Boar's Head. So Boar's Head is a premium specialty deli company. They've been around over 100 years. And the Boar's Head brand is that key master brand. And so it starts off with one category. Let's say it's deli meats. So it's Boar's Head sliced turkey, Boar's Head sliced ham. And you can have different line extensions off that master brand. So Boar's Head, now it's like turkey breast or chicken breast or roast beef, right? All Boar's Head. Now the decision comes, well, we want to move into another category, like say complementary, like cheeses, or let's say deli sausages. Well, then what should we do? Should we do a new brand, or should we stay with the Boar's Head? Well, a master brand strategy says, no, you stay with Boar's Head because it's premium. People recognize it. They're going to be more apt to try it. And so now it's Boar's Head specialty sausage. Now it's Boar's Head specialty cheeses. Boar's Head dips and hummus. So you can see the master brand extends across all the different categories. And the advantages of that is, one, you only have to manage one brand across many categories. So there's a lot of economies of scale. There's cost efficiency. So it's going to be less expensive because you're not stretching your dollars across many brands. You're actually concentrating this. And it's much more simple for consumers to understand. And when you launch a new innovation, there's already trust. So now when Boar's Head launched, say, specialty cheeses, they're like, oh, I already love Boar's Head meat. I think I'm going to try their cheeses because it probably has this similar brand values of quality, of innovation, of flavor that I've come to know and trust. Now I can get in a cheese? Great, we'll start to do it. Now, think about the disadvantages or the challenges of this master brand structure. Well, one is, what happens if there's a recall on Boar's Head sliced deli? Now, all of a sudden the news is like, oh, Boar's Head had a food safety issue. Maybe there was a coli. People are freaking out all over the place. There's there's negative press. Now, when you see Boar's Head cheeses or sausages, you might think twice, right? So we call that is you have a master brand dilution, or you have a performance issue that then could extend, which means that your risk is a little bit more concentrated. And so a master brand can be very effective, very good. And I would say majority of companies, they do love a master brand because it's much easier to control and it's easier to build value, but it can have risks, which is why when you get into it, you just need to really make sure your quality, your operations, everything is really dialed in as a company, because if the master brand falters, everything can falter. So you want to make sure that that is not the case. So the second one is a sub brand. So you take your master brand and you're going to create some distinct sub brands off of it. So an example here would be the Molson Beer Company. So you can see they have Molson Canadian, Molson Ultra, Molson Export. And why would you do that? Like why would you have these different sub brands? Well, one is that if you want to target different consumers within a very large category, you want to be able to relate to that consumer in a way that they understand, that they like, because they're a little bit different. So Molson Export might be about a different flavor profile, a different type of product experience, and maybe even a different consumer, maybe a little bit older, a little bit more refined because it's been around for a long time. And so they want that. And so you target that sub brand, that Molson Export, to that audience. Now, the difference is Molson Canadian is a little bit of that mainstream, lighter, think about that early 20s male audience. They don't want to be seen drinking old man beer, right? So they're like, I don't want to be an export guy. No, you're a Molson Canadian guy, right? I am Canadian, like this kind of. And so you can create a whole different segment of target audience, of product profile that fits that audience. And then Molson Ultra might be a little bit, less calories, a little bit more athletic, a little bit more for those who are a little bit conscious about what they're drinking, what they're doing. So you have that kind of segment that is there. But it's still all Molson, which means you can trust us. We know beer. We know what we're doing. You've come to know us for generations. And now you have a sub-brand that's perfect for you and your situation. And then you can create maybe cross-promotion opportunities. So you maybe have a mix pack of Canadian, Ultra, and Export all in one. So you come to a party and you're like, hey, everybody can have one. Dad, here's your Export, Bro, here's your Canadian. So you can start to see cross-promotion opportunities, but you're still jumping off of that master brand, but using sub-brands. And even those sub-brands can even have different price points, different products, different positions within the category for them. Challenges of a sub-brand strategy would be what? What do you think? Well, right, obviously you're still relying on the master brand. So if Molson screws up, well, then what happens, right? It's gonna affect all of the different sub-brands within that. So you're still gonna have that issue. You're now marketing different sub-brands on their own. So it's almost getting into a portfolio strategy, because you have to market Canadian different than Molson Ultra, than Molson Export. So they're each going to have their own marketing budgets, their own strategies towards it. So you're starting to create complication. You're starting to create more costs that you have to manage, and more brands that you're going to have to manage as well. So you don't want to do too many sub-brands where you can't manage them effectively, or else what happens is you get this distant kind of cousin out there that's just like, oh, what are we going to do with that brand? And then people are like, oh, should we, how much money do we put against it? And so it just ends up kind of dying. And if you do that, it sometimes can then tarnish the other sub-brands, because you're letting this one kind of just die in the vine. So you want to make sure that before you get into a sub-brand strategy, you've got enough money, you've got enough focus that you can at least all have a similar type of, I would say, support in the market from that. So the third brand architecture is what we call the endorsed brand strategy. Probably and this is where you're taking the master brand and you're using it to endorse a new category. So similar to sub-brands, but you're actually endorsing that. So a great example is Marriott Hotel Group. So Marriott is the big flagship brand. Everybody knows about it. It's around the world. And they wanted to create some different tiers, or they've acquired a hotel and they want to let people know that, hey, this is run by Marriott, which is known for great service, great stays, just comfort, convenience. And so now you're going to have Residence Inn by Marriott. You're going to have Fairfield by Marriott. So you can see how that the sub brand is actually just endorsed, so that consumers are like, oh, I've never heard of, this brand, Fairfield, but it's by Marriott. Oh, okay, I'm part of Marriott, and we can do that. Now, what will happen is Marriott, the advantages of this is, one, it creates trust with new consumers. It creates consistency, so you can start to here, these are the consistency that we want to have between all of our brands that we have. You can get into cross promotion, so the same loyalty points program between all these different hotels are all connected now because of Marriott. So it's easier for consumers if they want to have luxury to maybe longer stays or economy. They have a choice within the Marriott group from that. But you also then start to create complications. So the challenges of this is that, well, what happens if Marriott, master brand screws up? What happens if there's bad press? Well, one is that it could tarnish all of the brands, but it also then, you could take off the endorsed strategy when they're available from it. So if something did happen, sometimes you're like, oh, now we're just Fairfield, not by Marriott, if something happened. So they could exist by themselves potentially. But what the other option though is, what if one of these brands doesn't do well? Let's say, for example, Residence Inn, it just goes down. And all of a sudden it's Residence by Marriott. Now Marriott brand is actually being taken down by one of the sub brands. And so you can see that the risk is still a little bit higher. There's not as much, risk mitigation if one brand. So you're still making sure that you've got to have a really good master brand across all of the different components to make it work. And it's going to still be expensive. You still have to run each brand independently, even though they're from the endorsed strategy from it. So you might be able to get some economies of scale. Like I've seen different ads out there that's like, oh, super comfortable stay, you're going to love your business trip, Marriott, and then they show the different hotels within their, network, and you're like, oh yeah, I like those different hotel chains. Oh, now I know they're part of the Marriott group. That's good to know. So you can start to see you can get some economies of scale, but you are still very reliant on the master brand. And so the final brand architecture piece is what we call a portfolio strategy, or the colloquial way of calling it is a house of brands. And you're basically having a house of all these different brands. So think of the large multinational brands or organizations like ConAgra, PepsiCo, Procter & Gamble, Unilever, right? And so Unilever, you have different brands that are totally independent, that are, they own Ben & Jerry's, Dove, Axe Spray, so very cosmetic, CPG, some food portfolio, all these independent brands. So why would you get into that? Well, one is that it's kind of like you've got all these different brands in your portfolio that you can sell off if you want. You can acquire new ones and integrate them quite easily within your system. Your back of house is the sales, the operations, the HR, finance. That's all kind of one group. And then you have all these independent brands that allow it. You can also use that strategy where most consumers, you mitigate your risk, because most consumers don't know all these brands are owned by, certain companies. You would be shocked to see that the majority of all consumer packaged goods in North America is only owned by maybe 5 to 7 major players like Nestle and Coca-Cola and PepsiCo, Kellogg's. Like, they almost own them all. So you go to a grocery store, very few independents that are out there. And if consumers know that and they're like, oh, I don't really want to support that necessarily, or I don't love what they're doing, well, then you don't want that to tarnish everything else. So you keep the brands all independent. Sometimes brands have, they try to create connections. So General Mills on their cereal will have General Mills located on it. I know that S.C. Johnson We'll have, SC Johnson, a family company, but they've tried to connect their brands, almost like an endorsement brand strategy in a way. But a portfolio strategy can be really good. Now, the advantages, risk mitigation. You can get into different categories that are totally separate. You can build up more organizational value as a whole because these are assets. They're like you're building assets of these brands together from it. And then it's going to be able to, you're going to be able to target different consumers, different groups, even different retail channels potentially. So lots of different flexibility within this strategy. Now the challenge is though, it's a lot more expensive. So to have all these independent brands, they have to be run like almost independent business units. So they have their own strategy, their own P&Ls, their own marketing budgets, sometimes their own teams. Sometimes there's not a lot of crossover. I know that when I worked at Procter & Gamble, we were on the laundry team. And so you'd have Tide and Gain and Cheer, all together. But you still kind of ran your unit, your brand on its own because you want it to be successful. You wanted to have focus on it. So it is more expensive to be able to do it, but you can actually gain access to the category. And what I've talked with other very large companies is some cases they have 70% share of all that category with all their own brands. And consumers have no idea. And sometimes even the buyers don't really have a close idea of who owns what within that category. And they don't love it because it really maybe hurts their diversification and nobody wants too much, I would say brand concentration or customer concentration. So they're kind of looking at ways of saying, well, we don't want you to have that, but it's a great way to gain more shelf space as a manufacturer, as a brand owner, and you can be very, very flexible within that. Now, the other pieces that we're going to run into issues with, and we ran into a client where maybe probably about 10 years ago, we were working with a group. They were a bakery company, and it was, and this bakery company had the master brand, really successful master brand. It was growing, and then they created another line of organic lineup, which is a new brand, and then they came up with the gluten-free lineup, which is a new brand, and they were thinking, oh man, maybe we should actually just have a house of brand strategy and have our holding company become like the Procter & Gamble. And so we were like, yeah, you know what? That makes sense because that's what other people are doing. So we implemented it. And guess what happened? Well, when we went to their HR department, went into the community now as this new kind of parent company, they weren't getting as qualified candidates for roles. They had to educate all these people. When we went to trade shows, like nobody knew about them. And so it was confusing. And eventually we were like, you know what? Our master brand is so much stronger. Why wouldn't we just use that? And so we said, you know what? Let's scrap this idea. And yeah, we put money into it and building it up in a few years of trying to work at it. But we just said, no, we're going to abandon that. We're going to put the master brand back in. And now it's a hybrid. A hybrid situation is like Coca-Cola. So you have the Coca-Cola company, which is the parent company, but it's also a product brand because everybody knows what it is. And so even Coca-Cola company now, they own Sprite, they own, I think, what is it? Do they own Mountain Dew? I think so. I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments if they do or not. But they have all these different brands that they have underneath Coca-Cola, but it's a hybrid strategy that they have within that. So we went to a hybrid strategy and what we found, way better results. And the learning that I got from that was the master brand carries so much more equity than you think it does. And don't take that for granted. If I could go back in time, I would have said, no, let's do a hybrid strategy, have that master brand, and then maybe leverage a little bit more endorsed brand strategy, but pour more money into your core master. That is where you're going to be able to get way more value long-term. So as you're thinking about brand architecture, right, you go from singular master brand strategy, which is called the branded house, and you move all the way through sub-brands to endorsed brands to now we've got our house of brands, our portfolio strategy. And so you can see the spectrum. Now inside this spectrum, there's some hybrid options. I've seen different variations. I've seen companies acquire new brands and they're trying to figure this out. And so it can get a little bit messy. And your job as a marketer is to help organize that chaos in a very clear way so that you can message that to your sales team, to operations, to retailers that you're selling into, and then finally to consumers to create clarity. Brand architecture is about clarity, and clarity creates seamless execution. And without seamless execution, you can never drive results. So thank you so much. There's a lot more. Make sure you sign up at Brand Builders. We're always here for you. Have an awesome day.